If you were on the scene and you were powerful, like, to be honest, like, if you're not in those files, it would be an insult because it just means that you were a bit of a loser.
Your favorite artist has been practicing rituals in a satanic cult where they take babies from other countries and mutilate and kill them as a form of blood sacrifice to their god.
Epstein was possibly about to cooperate with the feds right before he died.
Now, Oprah is limited in the context of the files, but there is clear collusion between Oprah and Jeffrey Epstein.
What if the most powerful names in entertainment didn't appear in headlines, but quietly appeared in documents no one bothered to read? What if the real story isn't about what was proven, but about the patterns people can't stop noticing? When thousands of pages tied to Jeffrey Epstein were released, the internet didn't just scroll past them. People started searching, highlighting, connecting dots. And one name kept triggering debates across social media, podcasts, and commentary shows. Oprah Winfrey. Not accused, not charged, but mentioned, referenced, present in conversations orbiting a man whose network reached presidents, royalty, billionaires, and celebrities. And then Candace Owens stepped in. Not with allegations, but with questions that made people uncomfortable. Why do the same elite circles keep overlapping? Why do certain powerful names keep appearing around controversial figures years before the scandals break? And why does every discussion about Epstein eventually lead back to the same handful of cultural gatekeepers? This isn't about claims. This is about connections. This is about records. And this is about the public debate that refuses to go away. Because sometimes what's in the files isn't as loud as the questions they leave behind. The moment people stopped arguing about what was in the Epstein documents and started asking who kept appearing inside them, the conversation changed. Because names in legal records don't shout. They whisper. They sit quietly in contact logs, email chains, calendars, flight manifests, and meeting notes. And unless someone points at them and says, "Wait, why is this here?" most people never notice. That's exactly where the story begins. Not with accusations, not with headlines, but with repetition. Across podcasts, commentary shows, and late-night live streams, one observation kept coming back. The same powerful social circles seemed to overlap again and again around Jeffrey Epstein. Politicians, billionaires, royalty, media giants, cultural icons. And as commentators began reading through the dry, bureaucratic language of court exhibits and released documents, they realized something unsettling. These weren't random names. These were the people who shape narratives, the people who define culture, the people whose reputations are built on trust, influence, and moral authority. And this is where Candace Owens entered the discussion, not with claims of guilt, not with dramatic accusations, but with a style that makes people uncomfortable because she asks questions most hosts avoid. She began pointing out how often elite figures seem to orbit the same controversial personalities long before scandals became public. She asked why the public is always shocked after the fact, but rarely curious before the fact. And in that broader conversation, one name kept resurfacing in public debate: Oprah Winfrey. Again, not accused of wrongdoing, not linked to crimes, but present in conversations about how powerful social circles operate, how reputations are protected, and how certain figures seem to move through decades of controversy untouched. That's what made people pause. Because Oprah's brand has always been built on trust, empathy, and humanitarian work. She is seen as someone who elevates voices, supports victims, and promotes healing. But critics began looking at the pattern of high-profile men she publicly associated with over the years. Men who, at the time, were respected and celebrated, but who were later exposed in major scandals. Harvey Weinstein, R. Kelly, other influential figures whose reputations collapsed years later. Individually, these connections mean nothing. In Hollywood, everyone meets everyone. But when you step back and look at the timeline, some people started to ask, how do the same elite networks keep intersecting before the public ever knows there's a problem? Candace Owens framed it as a question of circles, not crimes. She argued that the Epstein story isn't only about one man. It's about the environments that allowed him to move freely among the most powerful people in the world. It's about how social legitimacy works, how being photographed with respected figures can function like a shield, how access to trusted names can open doors that would otherwise remain closed. And when you look at Epstein's documented strategy after his first conviction, rebranding himself through philanthropy, academia, and high society connections, the idea starts to feel less like speculation and more like a pattern of behavior. He didn't disappear. He integrated. He surrounded himself with scientists, donors, professors, media figures, and cultural icons. People whose reputations could soften the public perception around him simply by proximity. This is where public debate becomes uncomfortable, because no one is suggesting those people were involved in crimes. The discomfort comes from a different place, the realization that proximity itself can be powerful. That association, even innocent, can unintentionally help someone regain credibility. Owens highlighted how this works in elite spaces, how powerful people often share the same events, galas, charity boards, and social circles, how introductions happen through trusted intermediaries, how reputations become currency. And suddenly, the Epstein story stops being just about crimes. It becomes about influence, about access, about who vouches for whom. That's when viewers started revisiting old interviews, old photos, old connections, not looking for proof of wrongdoing, but looking for understanding of how these networks function. Why do certain figures always seem to be at the center of major cultural moments? Why do the same names appear across decades of power circles? And how does someone like Epstein manage to sit at tables with the world's most respected people after already being publicly disgraced? These questions don't accuse. They linger. And the more they linger, the harder they are to ignore.
Epstein files, it literally shows emails that Jeffrey Epstein was creating designer babies. I really want to know why we haven't heard the DOJ talk about this, especially since some of the survivors said that this happened to them in Jeffrey Epstein's New Mexico property, Zorro Ranch. How I found out that he was working with another person to create these designer babies is because I saw him ordering a lot of 23andMe kits, and he was sending them to a lot of different people as gifts. In this email, he was sending some to Woody Allen and his adopted daughter at one point in time, who is now his wife. And I started to see a lot of emails in the Epstein files of people saying that they were pregnant to Jeffrey Epstein, or even alluding that he had actual children. Like this email in 2011 to Jeffrey Epstein, and it appears to be from Sarah Ferguson. And it said, "You have disappeared. I didn't even know you were having a baby. It's so crystal clear to me that you were only friends with me to get to Andrew, and that really hurt me deeply, more than you will know. Congratulations on your baby boy." And this email in 2006 from Glenn Dubin to Jeffrey Epstein. "I get pictures of you flying over Mount Fiji, and I have to find out from Benghazi that you have twin babies. Eva and I are so excited for you. Please send pictures ASAP." And Glenn Dubin says, "Test tube babies, just thinking." Started looking up the term babies in the Epstein files, and this is when I came across this. It was titled Designer Babies in August of 2018, and he has it on like an agenda. Then I found this email, and it's from Brian Bishop to Jeffrey Epstein, and it's Designer Babies / Brian Bishop. So I looked up who Brian Bishop was, because I was like, why are they saying designer babies? And it says, Brian Bishop is a software engineer and a biohacker who gained attention for his attempts to fund and advance a do-it-yourself, or DIY, designer baby project using Bitcoin. His project aimed to utilize the CRISPR gene editing technology to engineer human embryos for enhanced traits, such as increased muscle mass or improved memory. And this is the next email I found about designer babies, and it's from Brian Bishop to Jeffrey Epstein, and it says, "Here is a deck about my designer baby project. I have talked with Austin again, and we have a series of questions about how serious you are about wanting this, and what are the ground rules for me even exploring this with you." And
as the conversation widened, something interesting happened. People stopped focusing only on headlines and started paying attention to timelines. Because timelines don't lie. They don't dramatize. They don't exaggerate. They simply show who was where, when, and around whom. And when commentators began lining up dates from public appearances, charity events, interviews, and social gatherings, a bigger picture started forming about how elite access actually works. Jeffrey Epstein didn't operate in isolation. He operated in rooms full of respected, admired, and trusted individuals. Universities welcomed his donations. Scientists attended his dinners. Public figures crossed paths with him at high-profile events. This wasn't a hidden, underground world. It was happening in plain sight, in the most polished environments imaginable. That's the part that made viewers uncomfortable, because it suggested that Epstein's greatest protection wasn't secrecy. It was visibility. He was seen with people the public trusted, and that visibility made him look legitimate. Candace Owens leaned into this idea. She didn't ask, who is guilty? She asked, how does someone like this get socially certified after already being exposed? She pointed out how reputations in elite spaces often function like endorsements. If respected figures interact with you publicly, most people assume you've been vetted. That's how influence spreads without anyone realizing it's happening. And when Owens discussed Oprah in this context, it wasn't framed as an accusation. It was framed as an example of how powerful cultural figures can unintentionally become part of a larger image machine. Oprah represents trust, compassion, authority, cultural leadership. When someone like Epstein can move in spaces where those qualities are present, it changes how he's perceived, even if no one intends for that to happen. That's what sparked debate online. Viewers began revisiting old interviews, photos, and reports, not to prove anything criminal, but to understand how proximity to respected figures may have helped controversial individuals rebuild credibility over time. It also reopened discussions about other figures whose reputations collapsed years later. People who, at one time, were embraced by the same social and entertainment circles. At the time, no one suspected anything. In hindsight, it all feels different. And that hindsight is powerful, because now audiences aren't just asking, who knew? They're asking, how did the system of access work so smoothly for so long? Owens emphasized that elite circles are smaller than people realize. The same names appear at the same events, sit on the same boards, attend the same galas, and move through the same private networks. Introductions are made through trusted contacts. Reputations travel through association. So when a controversial figure manages to remain present in those spaces, it raises questions about how much weight we place on social validation. Not legal validation, social validation. The kind that comes from being seen in the right rooms with the right people. And once viewers started seeing the Epstein case through that lens, the story stopped being only about crimes. It became about influence, perception, and the quiet power of association. Because sometimes, the most important part of a story isn't what was done. It's how someone was allowed to keep standing in places where they never should have felt comfortable in the first place. By this point, the discussion had drifted far away from courtrooms and into something much harder to define: culture. Because what unsettled people wasn't only what Epstein did. It was how long he was able to exist in environments built on prestige, intellect, charity, and media influence without setting off louder alarms. That's the part Candace Owens kept circling back to. She argued that the Epstein case forces a different kind of question, one that has less to do with criminal law and more to do with social architecture. Who gets trusted automatically? Who gets access without scrutiny? And how often do we assume that proximity to respected figures equals credibility? When viewers started looking at it that way, the story felt bigger than any one person. It became about how elite ecosystems function. The same donors fund the same institutions. The same public figures attend the same global events. The same cultural leaders move through the same private networks year after year. In those spaces, introductions aren't random. They're inherited through reputation. And once you're inside, you're treated as if you belong there. That's how someone like Epstein could sit at tables with professors, philanthropists, media icons, and business leaders even after his past was publicly known. Owens suggested that this isn't a glitch in the system. It's a feature of how influence works. Social proof travels faster than background checks. If enough trusted people treat you like you're legitimate, the public rarely questions why. And this is where the public debate around Oprah kept resurfacing, not as an allegation, but as a symbol of how trust operates at the highest levels. Oprah's image represents credibility, empathy, and moral authority. So when people discuss how controversial figures move through elite circles, her name naturally comes up as part of that broader conversation about influence. Again, not because of accusations, but because of what she represents in the public mind. A gatekeeper of culture, a curator of voices, a figure whose approval carries enormous weight. Owens' point was uncomfortable but simple. When trust is this powerful, it can sometimes be used, intentionally or not, to soften the edges around people who shouldn't be softened. That idea stuck with viewers because it reframed the Epstein story as something ongoing, not a closed case, not a historical scandal, but a lesson in how easily perception can be shaped by who stands next to whom. And once you start seeing that pattern, you begin noticing it everywhere. You realize that scandals rarely appear out of nowhere. The warning signs often exist years earlier, hidden in plain sight inside photos, interviews, guest lists, and social calendars that no one thought to question at the time. That's what made this conversation viral. Not outrage, not accusations, but recognition. Recognition that the world of power is smaller than it looks, that influence travels quietly, and that sometimes the most revealing part of a story isn't the crime itself. It's the company someone was able to keep while everyone else assumed everything was fine. Before you click away, take a second and sit with this. This story was never about proving guilt. It was about understanding patterns, about asking why the same elite circles keep overlapping long before the public ever realizes there's a problem, about noticing how influence, reputation, and proximity can shape perception in ways most people never question. Because once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. You begin to look at headlines differently, photos differently, interviews differently. You start asking yourself, who is standing next to whom? Who is vouching for whom without even realizing it? And how often does social credibility travel faster than actual scrutiny? That's the uncomfortable part. And that's exactly why conversations like this matter. Not to accuse, not to sensationalize, but to observe how powerful networks function behind polished events, charity galas, and media appearances that most of us only see from a distance. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think proximity to respected figures can unintentionally legitimize the wrong people? Do elite circles protect their own without even realizing it? And do stories like this change how you view public trust and influence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is one of those discussions where every perspective adds something important. If you found this breakdown thought-provoking, make sure you hit like so more people can see it. Subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the headlines. And turn on notifications, because the next topic might make you question something you thought you understood completely. Because sometimes the real story isn't loud. It's hidden in plain sight.